I am not a historian, but neither are you. So, how about we, the people, learn this stuff together? Welcome to US 101. What do you guys think? I added something new to the wall. It's a copy of the Declaration of Independence. What else should I put on this wall behind me? If you've ever taken a social studies class or a US history class, then you're probably pretty familiar with this picture, which was done by Paul Revere, and it depicts what is now known as the Boston Massacre of 1770. But let's take a closer look at this picture, why don't we? Okay, what do we see? Big picture. You see a group of British Army regulars firing into a crowd of colonists, a huge plume of smoke rising from all the bullets that the muskets are shooting, while victims are laying on the ground, bloodied, wounded, and dead. It's a pretty grim picture, right? In fact, it was so grim that the image was spread first around Boston, then around Massachusetts, and then around other colonies, and it enraged colonists so much that it led them to rally even more against the British crown. And then, of course, those rallies would go ahead and piss off King George III, which would lead to him passing more acts against the colonies, which would then lead to even more pissed off colonists, which would all eventually lead to battles in Lexington and Concord, thus kicking off the War for Independence. This picture right here could very well have been the powder keg that led to this explosion. But do you know the whole story behind this picture? Behind the Boston Massacre? How about we go ahead and hit you with some context first, just so that you understand the whole story. Following the end of the French and Indian War in 1763, the British, which were the victors of that war, were now in some serious debt. The British put a lot of money into that war so that they could come out on top, and come out on top they did, but because of all that money they put into the war, they are now in debt, and how do you pay back that debt? You raise taxes and you levy taxes against your colonies. So you had things that were passed like the Stamp Act, which was a tax on pretty much all paper products. And then after that act was repealed, you had the Townsend duties that were passed, which taxed items like glass, lead, tea, paper, and paint. However, because all these acts and all these taxes are being levied against the colonies, you now have the argument coming from the colonists of taxation without representation. We have no voice in Parliament. How are you passing these taxes on us without our say? From there, you had delegates getting together at things like the Stamp Act Congress, which were discussing why these taxes were being passed on them. But then on the more street level, you had the Sons of Liberty, which are being led by Samuel Adams, and they're doling out a bit of more street justice, i.e. going to the homes of stamp masters and destroying their property and burning their houses down, and then burning people that they don't like in effigy. And because all this stuff is happening in the colonies, all this sort of uprising against the British crown, you have Britain then responding by sending more troops to the colonies to sort of quell all this rabble-rousing, to sort of maintain order, if you will. So it's at this time you've got all of these pissed off, really upset colonists that all these things are happening to them and they are not happy about, and then at the same time you've got more British soldiers coming to the colonies to try to maintain order, but these British soldiers are nothing more than living embodiments of King George III's oppression. At some point, all that's going to come to a head. Which now brings us to the day in question, March 5, 1770. The scene? King Street in Boston, Massachusetts. During the evening of March 5th, the 29th Regiment shows up to King Street to relieve another regiment of duty. So now it's the 29th Regiment's turn to stand there and, assume their post and watch over the crowd. And when the 29th shows up, a crowd begins forming around the regiment, and they start taunting the soldiers, and they start throwing things at them like snowballs and ice and other small objects. And they start taunting the soldiers with phrases like, "Go ahead and fire. Fire, damn you," pretty much egging them on. Like, I dare you. You got these guns in my face. What are you going to do with them? Come on. Now, some historians have claimed that this crowd, which would soon turn into a mob, was led by the man known as Crispus Attucks. And on the other side of the mob, you've got the British regiment, which is being led by Captain Thomas Preston. Now, Preston is overseeing the regiment, and he's seeing the crowd get more and more hostile towards his soldiers. But at the same time, he is telling his soldiers, do not fire into the crowd. I don't care how mad they get, do not shoot these people. Which does make sense, because think about it. If British soldiers start shooting colonists, what are colonists at this time? They are British citizens. They are subjects of the crown. So if you have British soldiers shooting subjects of the crown, that's not a really good look. So Preston is telling his men, do not fire at the crowd, while the crowd is taunting them saying, fire, damn you, fire. And then we kind of all know what came next. It's said that somebody hit Private Hugh Montgomery with a stick, cutting him in the face and knocking him down. And when he got knocked down, his musket accidentally discharged. And when one gun goes off, the soldiers hear that one gun go off. They're like, all right, cool, I guess that's the order, man. And they point the guns into the crowd and begin firing at the colonists. All the while, Captain Thomas Preston is like one of those wacky waving inflatable arm tube guys going, no, don't stop, what are you doing? But by then, it's too late, because once the shooting has stopped, 11 people have been hit with bullets, have been injured from the shooting, and 3 men, Samuel Gray, James Caldwell, and Crispus Attucks, die that night. And then a few days later, 2 more people, Samuel Maverick and Patrick Carr, would die from the wounds that they sustained during that evening's shooting. Following the evening of March 5, 1770, which would become known as the Bloody Massacre at the time, Captain Preston and his men are arrested and they are charged with murder. Now, what happens when you're charged for a crime? You have to go to trial, which meant that somebody in the colonies had to defend Captain Preston and his men in a courtroom that was going to be comprised of a jury of colonists, of Massachusetts men, and a crowd that would watch the trial, complete with people from Boston. So who would dare step up and try to defend these accused men that are already hated by everyone in the colony? Enter John Adams, the future signer of the Declaration of Independence and the future second president of the United States. He took on the task of defending Captain Preston and his men alongside another lawyer, Josiah Quincy Jr. And on November 27, 1770, Adams pleads his case before the court, saying that these soldiers were only trying to defend themselves from an ever-growing angry mob. He claims that the soldiers have a right to defend themselves from potential harm, and it works! Adams wins the case. Captain Preston is found not guilty at his own trial, and then 6 of the 8 soldiers that were charged with murder are acquitted. 2 of the soldiers, though, they do get hit with a manslaughter charge, but they don't serve any time. Instead, they get basically like a little slap on the wrist. They get branded on their hands as a sign of like, oh, you did bad, shame on you, you shot people, terrible. But the end of the Boston Massacre does not mean that all of a sudden there is now social order. All is right. They were just defending themselves. We were wrong. The colonists, we were wrong. No. They continue to rally against the crown. You have stuff like the Boston Tea Party that will happen a couple years later, followed by the Intolerable Acts, which is passed by the crown, which one of those intolerable acts, by the way, says that any British soldier that commits a crime in the colonies will now stand trial in England. So remember the picture of the Boston Massacre that was done by Paul Revere that I showed you at the very top of the episode? How about we look at it again? See if we can look at it a little bit differently this time. So we have the picture, and how about the fact that Captain Preston is standing behind his men, looking as if he's ordering to fire when in fact that was not the case. It was said that he was standing in front of his men, telling them not to fire. And then how about behind the soldiers, you have a building with the words Butcher's Hall on it, as well as a tiny musket coming out of the windows. You think maybe that would signify the fact that this was going to be a violent night and that the Brits were violent people and they had malice in their hearts? Possibly. Finally, and this one might sound a bit weird, but look at the dog. The dog is standing on the side of the fallen colonists. Now, what do people call dogs? They're known as man's best friend, right? So the best friend, aka the good guys in this case, are the innocent colonists who were wrongfully shot rather than being portrayed as a mob that was angrily taunting British soldiers. So of course Revere would put the dog on the side of the colonists, because a dog couldn't be friends with brutes like the British. Right? So hopefully this episode sheds a bit more light on the Boston Massacre that you may not have known previously. And also, the next time you look at a picture, a photo, a drawing, or rendering of any type of scene, make sure to look closely, because sometimes the devil is really in the details. And that is it, my friends. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today and for checking out the episode. Really do appreciate it. And thanks to all of you that have subscribed to the channel, that like the videos, that share them, and that leave comments in the comment section down below. Again, let me know your thoughts on this picture from Paul Revere and the Boston Massacre. Additionally, also let me know what you guys think I should be putting on this wall. What other things you think might help the scene pop a bit more. As always, guys, you can follow US 101 on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All those links down below in the description box. I will see you next Tuesday for an all-new episode of US 101. Until then, we are all done. Remember the dog. The dog is the center of that entire operation. I know you didn't think about it, but I just blew your mind, didn't I? Yup, totally did. Totally did.